Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Land, where we explore news in and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm managing editor Dave Noyce. I oversee the Salt Lake Tribune's faith coverage. I'm joined again by senior religion reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack. Hello, Peggy.
Hi, Dave.
We remind our listeners about another way to support Mormon Land. Just go to patreon.com, where with a small donation, as small as $3 a month, you can access transcripts to our podcasts, our complete newsletter, and all of our exclusive religion coverage. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Mormonland. Now for today's show. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints repeatedly has proclaimed that it has zero tolerance for abuse of any kind. That's all well and good, but not enough, reason some British Latter-day Saints. They wanted their faith to do more, to undertake concrete reforms that could help prevent abuse from happening in the first place. So they launched a widespread public and private lobbying effort. They surveyed members. They wrote to their church leaders. They contacted national lawmakers. All that praying, pleading, and prodding finally paid off when, starting this month, the church adopted a new policy mandating, among other measures, background checks for any church volunteers in the United Kingdom who work with children, youths, or vulnerable adults. Sara, Delaney, and Jane Christie, who together began the 21st Century Saints podcast, along with Douglas Stilgoe, host of the Nemo the Mormon podcast, join us today via Zoom to discuss their campaign, when they started it, how they structured it, and why it succeeded. Welcome to all three of you.
Hi.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, lovely to be with you.
So glad to have you. So, Sara, a question. I'm going to start with you. What was the genesis of this whole thing? What triggered this whole effort?
The fact that we understood that there were so many people whose stories of harm and abuse had not been heard by the church. We knew of so many people that had been abused. We knew that the standards of safeguarding that the church were applying fell far below that which was expected by the UK government and far below that recommended by UK safeguarding experts. And we were concerned that the church was giving an illusion that the place was safe because they had some safeguarding in place, but there was no substance to the measures that they were implementing. So on the backdrop of having been speaking to church leaders for years and trying to request that they did something about safeguarding, and they took it seriously, that they looked at some of the research, the evidence, the learning from best books, which we're taught to do all the time. We said, come on, you can do this and you can actually make this church a safe place. And we're just getting knocked back and silenced and no response. So then Jane and I came together and talked this through and decided that it needed a well-planned campaign of activism with grassroots membership to say, this can be better. This church can be a safer place. People can experience significantly less harm, and we can do something about that. So we founded what we did on knowledge, on evidence, on research, presented those facts to the church and took it from there.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, and you've alluded to this now a little bit, but how did each of you end up joining this effort? How did you all end up working together?
Shall I take that one, Sara? Yeah. So we, as friends, we all started hanging out. We met at Sunstone. We were hanging out online. We had started as individuals podcasts. So I started 21st Century Saints quite a while after Nemo had started his Nemo the Mormon podcast. And along with some of the other British podcasters, Peter Bleakley, Priesthood Dispatches, we all have such different approaches, radically different approaches. I always joke that Priesthood Dispatches, his content is going to give me a nosebleed. Nemo the Mormon is super edgy and fact-checking. And Peter Bleakley was excommunicated for some of the things that he was talking about. We are sort of a faithful and nuanced podcast, and we had started because so many people, so many of our friends were leaving the church and having these fascinating conversations in the corridors about what was happening and things that they really wanted to talk about. So we started the podcast to have these difficult conversations. And of course, when you start talking about pain as it relates to your faith, people began to talk about abuse. So with Sara's background, when Sara became one of the 21st Century Saints team, and we also have Ruth Heath, Ruth is no longer a member of the church. We hope to try and bring this balance as 21st Century Saints. the fact that we can have these really fantastic conversations. We can talk about the problems. We can utterly disagree. And we can counsel together with our colleagues, Nemo the Mormon and the rest of the podcasting gang, about some of the real difficulties we're seeing. So some of those difficulties, Sara has a career worth of incredible experience working in a field of social work and working with offenders and people who have been harmed. That when we started hearing that Sara has been working for such a long time and trying to address the fact that the measures the church currently have in place, while well-meaning, do create an illusion of safeguarding. I don't think none of us think for 1 second that the church wants to do a poor job. But we would see people who would go to work in the daytime and who would have to abide by professional standards, and would go to church where those standards are just not being reflected. So basically, our journey and how we get together starts with conversations. We were working with people who were disclosing abuse to us who have still not come forward because we can't have conversations. We don't have a language to talk about abuse. We don't have a language to talk about how that even begins. And so to even think about responding to abuse, we noticed that the policies were really, really not what members really want to sort of feel that they are. So we would see members sort of saying, well, we've got this too deep policy now. We acknowledge that the church makes really clear statements on abuse. There's a really clear theological underpinning for why the church won't tolerate abuse, but how that plays out in real time. We pointed out holes in the system, and incredibly, between amplifying the voices of victims, talking about, this isn't the first time that Sara has spoken about abuse. And it's not the first time for so many members of the church, not just in the United Kingdom, but throughout the world. As we're working in this space with podcasters who are talking about the really difficult things, suddenly we saw, for the first time in what I think is Mormon history, we're in a space where everyone is in agreement that we want to do better, that we should have the very, very best standard of how we treat keeping our vulnerable people safe. And we're all in the same space with leaders who it's important to, with an area leadership who it's important to, and they were listening. So a safeguarding committee was established. They've carried a lot of the work forward, and the fact that we're in this space and that we're going to see evolving policies is just incredible.
So, Nemo, do you have something how did you get involved in this?
I got involved. I'm known for my letter writing and for generally being able to get hold of information. So we'd been working together and collaborating anyway. We'd done panel discussions on various things, the state of the church in the UK. The church has just lost 12 units. They've had 12 wards closed down in the past 12 months. 4 stakes have been closed in the past 12 months. There's a big shrinkage of the church here. So we've been, as British members who have a vested interest in following that story, working together anyway. So then when the idea comes up amongst our group that we possibly ought to inform bishops of their liability under UK law, should they allow someone to work with a child who is on the barred list, who's on the list of people who isn't allowed to, there's legal problems there. So I I wrote the letter that got sent to all 300 and something bishops in the UK, and I spent possibly 12 hours of my life trawling through the LDS Maps tool to find the name and meeting house address, not personal address, but meeting house address of every single bishop in the UK. The stamps were bought and paid for, and we sent all the letters out. That was kind of one of the ways I got involved. And just generally, I've done letter campaigns before. I've worked with local leaders, got my concerns heard by Dan H. Oaks before by just writing the right thing, getting people to listen in the right way. So that's the skills I kind of brought to it.
So was that the very first thing you all did, was a letter writing campaign?
No,
No, Peggy, we started with the very first thing we did was Jane and I notified our bishops and stake presidents that we intended to launch this campaign. We wrote, these are our concerns. This is where the church is failing, and we know the church want to do better. So we actually informed them that this was the steps we planned to take. Then we started with a formal letter that we sent to our stake presidents that outlined some of the harm that we had seen because of ineffective abuse policies, some of the standards and practices that needed to be implemented. We gave evidence for them, and we gave a list of things that we really wanted to see, such as background checks, information displayed in all chapels and buildings about where people could find help if they were being abused or if they felt that they had a concern about somebody. And we wanted to see a much greater enhanced level of training and knowledge base for people in leadership positions in the church around abuse. So we put that in writing to our stake presidents and had a formal podcast launch on the 17th of August, where we spoke very clearly about what our concerns were, why we felt this was an important topic for us to address, and encouraged everybody to print this letter off. We put a template on the website and we said, please send this letter to your stake presidents and your bishops and ask them to raise stake safeguarding with their leaders and to look at this as a church. So we started with a letter writing campaign and a petition at the same time. So we started with those two. The petition was very much about getting the conversation going. We wanted people to be coming up and saying, have you seen this petition? What's this about? Who's doing this? Why are they doing this? We wanted the conversation started. And I think that was the strength of this campaign. We got the grassroots membership talking about safeguarding, asking questions, wondering why are you concerned about it? Well, wouldn't the prophet have said if it was a problem? And we were saying, well, actually, no, that's not how it's working. And we wanted that conversation. So that's how we started. And then very quickly moved on. Jane, do you want to talk about our open letter that we then sent?
Yeah. So the open letter, we drafted it 1 million times. We ran it past all our colleagues. We wanted to make sure that the tone was exactly correct, that we needed to have better standards. We also wanted to make it really clear we are church members, and we wanted to invite everyone who has a vested interest in safeguarding to co-sign the letter. So we had some of the big names in ex-Mormon podcasting and Mormon podcasting all came together to sign the letter. So it's still on our website and available to view. The first people to sign it were our British colleagues. And I think at that point, people naturally, they want to know what intent we have. Is this some kind of critical anti-Mormon thing? And of course, what we were doing was simply amplifying voices of victims, voices of professionals, voices of church members, voices of church and area leaders that we had spoken to. We wanted to really emphasize that we're not criticizing in order to tear down. We're pointing out some real issues. So, for example, if you have done the training, and most members of the church should have completed the online training, even if you haven't worked with children and youth, it's something that you should definitely be familiar with. It's a cartoon. It minimises the subject of safeguarding. It doesn't allow us to address any of our potential biases or really look at ways that we can challenge what our ideas of abuse are. So we wanted to take things that people were already concerned about and amplify the voices of the reality being that a lot of people who report abuse leave the church. The easiest thing to do in the UK is it's a lot harder to stay Mormon. To be Mormon, you have to really want to be Mormon here. So people, when they are hurt and it doesn't seem like they're going to see any change within the system, it's much easier just to leave. And without those voices, the church is missing. We are, as a community, missing a huge part of the picture. Really good safeguarding is informed and shaped by victim experiences. And so if we're all sort of sitting in councils talking about what we think good safeguarding would look like, without those voices, then we're not doing good safeguarding. It's about us and not about learning lessons from what has happened in the past. And, sort of with that same, the same sort of journey, while we're sending out this open letter, putting it online, it was received with kindness and grace from every leader who we physically put it in the hands of. Everyone received it with support, and we have had practically no pushback. We've had maybe a couple of members sending us an email, but in general, this has been received so well. The only thing we do sometimes hear concern expressed about has been, for example, the people who co-signed the letter, or how much has Nemo the Mormon actually worked with you on this? And the reality is, Nemo's one of our close friends. All of these podcasters and our British podcasting, Brit Vengers, as we're fondly referred to, they are part of our process of figuring out, okay, how can we approach this? What can we learn from each other? Radically different views, all brought into the mix. That we don't, we push back. We have discussions, and to see us all be here at the same time, the Book of Mormon sort of phrasing of people speaking with one voice. This is the first time, I believe, in Mormon history that we've been able to see that really playing out. So we now have this policy because we all asked for it, and it's a beautiful thing. I would also just on that, something that I think is hugely important is that the story often, I think, is coming across like, oh, we've got background checks. That's really good. We've always been super clear. Background checks are a tiny, an important but tiny part of this story. What we actually have is safeguarding training that's going to be disseminated through the stakes, safeguarding specialists that are going to be called in each stake. And the first person in the UK to receive that call was Sara, who was set apart. And yes, Sara, do you want to maybe share about that?
Well, I'm actually, I think I'll just add a little bit to what you said. I think one of the other things we did that was really successful, because it brought together all Mormon voices, as Jane has so clearly said, it brought together everybody. But the other thing we did was we assured our leaders that we wanted to work with them. We were really clear with our priesthood leadership. We want to work with you. We want to stand shoulder to shoulder with you. We are not saying you have to get this right, you have to do it, and we're going to stand by and criticise. We prepared documents, we wrote policies, we wrote papers, we wrote ideas, suggestions, training. We put together huge amounts of information for them to assist and support them in the role. So we weren't just saying, you need to get on with that. We were saying, we are here. We will work. We will do everything we can with you. And we had some fantastic conversations along the way, and some difficult conversations along the way with leaders. And, most of them were great conversations. There were times they were difficult and they were awkward, but we had those conversations and moved forward. And I think it's been really powerful to be able to say to everybody in the church, if you care about safeguarding, then I don't care whether you believe the church is true, whether you don't like the church, whether you can't tolerate the church, whatever your view of the church, it doesn't matter. If you want the church to be a safe place for children and vulnerable adults to grow their faith and be nurtured, then you are really welcome into our little group to work and stand side by side with us to campaign for that. And I think it's really important that those voices came together.
Yeah, and so you were set apart, Sara. Do you want to maybe tell everyone about that?
Yeah. That was actually wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it is no secret to my leaders that I'm a very, very nuanced church member, very nuanced. And I've had huge sorts of conversations along the way around that. And one of the things that we had recommended was that the church call specialists to work in safeguarding to assist stake presidents. We said this is a huge amount of work. There's a lot to be done. Stake presidents are busy people that want to get it right. So they need somebody to assist and help them with that. So it would be great if you could call people to this role. And that was one of the recommendations that they picked up and they were willing to go with. So we are incredibly grateful to our church leaders that they were willing to do that. And then my stake president asked me if I would be the safeguarding specialist for our stake. So far, there's only been me called in the UK, but every stake in the UK has to have a safeguarding specialist by the 1st of August. So we're going to see a flurry of activity over the next few weeks as stake presidents try to get to grips with who they need to call. There has been an agreement that people they call to the role of safeguarding specialists will be people who have got a background and experience of working within safeguarding professionally and have got some knowledge and some skill base in that field anyway. So that's going to really give people a head start in this calling. Because it's incredibly new, it's going to be shaped as we go. So the role is going to be about training priesthood leaders, helping with decision making, auditing the quality of what's happening around safeguarding. So when I was called and set apart, Nemo, because he's my dear friend and he loves me, made the long journey over to my ward to come and be with me while I was called and set apart. And then when we went for me to be set apart, I said I would really like Dougie, who's driven all the way over here to be with me, to support me in this. I'd love him to stand in the circle and be with part of setting me apart. And that was great. That was absolutely fantastic to see somebody be able to use their priesthood power and authority for something that is dear to their heart and something that they want to see happen in the church, which is safeguarding specialists to help drive this forward and help work in this space to make it as good as it can be. To see him able to use his priesthood power and authority to set me apart.
Best thing I've done with my priesthood in years.
Isn't it? I will be honest, Peggy. We've had some difficult conversations and pushback over that. You know, hang on a minute. How did Nemo happen to be part of this? So we have had some conversations about that. But I think it was great. And how wonderful would this church be if we could be so inclusive that just because Nemo has a podcast and doesn't always agree with the church and will fact check and call it out when he doesn't agree with something, but how inclusive and fantastic that he can use his priesthood authority for something that should be a blessing to the church.
Yeah.
So
there was a lot of pushback on that. Go on, Peggy.
Doug,
what was some pushback?
What was your, how did you approach your lobbying in public?
The public forum. I hosted a lot of panel discussions, kind of pushing the church, keeping everyone up to date with how it was all going behind the scenes, almost so that the public are aware. It's one of the reasons we went to Jana and we're kind of trying to tip off journalists and let journalists know is that the church then can't walk this policy back. If the public know them saying things to us behind closed doors, oh yeah, you're going to get this on the 1st of June or you're going to get this in July or whatever. If they're putting those lines out there and then these letters are getting sent out but not announced generally, then we want the public and particularly the members of the church to know that they should now expect this of them. So one of the broadcasts we did or that I hosted was a panel discussion about the response from the church to the letters that we sent to all the bishops, because those letters put the cat amongst the pigeons in a way that I think really moved things forward, because you've got all these bishops going, I didn't know this, talking to their stake president, or these other leaders going, oh, I didn't know. And then it starts this conversation. But Church Legal Council weren't particularly happy. They did try to imply to those bishops in a letter that got sent to local leaders that we got slid a copy of and then read online to show them that there are no secrets in this. We read this letter that was slid across to us, and they tried to imply that I was spreading false information and that we'd somehow found their home addresses, despite the fact that it's the church that puts the postal redirects in place and we'd only ever sent letters to. So they tried, particularly me. I've ended up being this individual that they can blame everything bad on because Jane and Sara are absolutely lovely and have got all the actual good ideas. And I'm just the guy that gets the flack because, you know, it's easy then.
We do joke that there's times we've thrown Nemo under the bus in order for us to be able to go on and have a good conversation with someone. But
that's only because I tease him about, like how I actually would throw him under a bus. But I wouldn't really. No, I think how we have approached lobbying has been using what is available to us. So to be fair, at times we must have really frustrated our leaders and the lawyers, and because that's not how this works, right? We're supposed to wait for someone to tell us. And so, it must be really tough to deal with that new dynamic and decide what you do with it. But we said the things that we needed to say. And we haven't sort of updated our website. We intend to do that. You can take a look. We do not mince our words. We are very, very clear that, what's not okay. We also, while using our channel tends to be safe. It reaches across a Mormon spectrum. So it tends to be safe for members and also something that attracts the interest of non-members too. So we really are quite unique in that space. So when it comes to having a discussion where we would analyze what safeguarding would look like, we would turn to Nemo and suggest, look, here's a bigger topic that's going to require a lot more analysis. You have a particular audience. Let's have that conversation there. Nemo was always super gracious in facilitating that. We also worked alongside, we spoke with our local elected representatives.
Yeah.
We would speak with really anyone who had a vested interest in this area. So specifically some of the national charities and organizations who specialize in this field. We would take advice from them. We learned a lot from them. We were invited to speak about Mormonism and safeguarding and what our campaign had looked like at the beginning of the year. And so much has happened in that short space of time. So when a matter of weeks into the year, we were told that a safeguarding committee was being set up. I mean, I was furious. I mean, we were delighted because, when does a new committee ever get set up for something that women have asked for, right? But I thought, this is going to be sitting with a committee and nothing's going to get done and it'll be years. Well, what is to discuss? And actually, they worked so hard. They were meeting constantly. They took it really, really seriously. So from Sara saying that we began this work on, formally on the 17th of August, it hasn't been even a year. And we see this part of our campaign that, we have these incredible results that we do believe are going to filter through the rest of the world as the church learns what's working and some of the ways in which that's going to evolve. It's a really exciting time.
Yeah. And I think one thing that strongly got our church leaders' attention was we were invited by one of the leading national children's charities in the UK, the NWG. We were invited, they specialise in exploitation and sexual abuse and harm of children, trafficking. We were invited by them to address a national charity around abuse in religious settings, particularly talking about our experience of the Mormon church. And that strongly focused the attention of the church lawyers in the area presidency and our church leaders. As we wrote to them and told them, we said, in the spirit of honesty and transparency, working together, we've received this invite. We have accepted it. We will be giving a presentation at this conference, and we'd love to talk with you about this presentation so that you know what we're going to go and do. And I think that was a really powerful moment as well to demonstrate the importance of safeguarding moving forward.
Nemo, did you have something else you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we know anyone who's spent any time with the LDS PR machine as it whatever is left of it after Mike Otterson left, they will know that the church will want to spin this not as an activist cause or as anything like that, but instead that, local leadership felt impressed to make a change in their local area and it was approved by the area presidency and everyone worked within their proper form and function. But the reality of it was the thing that undermines that, because I've had that pushback from leaders trying to tell me, no, we were going to do this for a long time. It's not about the activism. Was that at a government inquiry in 2019, the church's representative said, well, their what they were currently doing was fine. They felt no need to change it. And then they felt they had a good standard of safeguarding. So to go from that in 2019 to in 2023, all of a sudden, when we happen to turn up on the scene and start making some noise and giving them very good ideas and them then implementing those ideas that we give them, I think it's blown out the water, the idea that this had nothing to do with us. I think that's an important point to make.
While I really appreciate that take, and I think this is sort of reflective of the conversations that we have as people who work in different spaces with different approaches, what I tend to see is the fact that the United Kingdom was uniquely positioned to be able to enact these changes. So while national inquiries were happening at a level where organisations were being asked to really think about what they could learn and what their procedures were, the recommendations from that national inquiry, the ICSA report, had come out towards the end of last year. And this is what we were sort of basing our presentation on was, look, if the church implements all of these recommendations, then there is the possibility that the church could actually be a world leader in safeguarding and not something that we would have to feel really uncomfortable about and have that tension. You know, I wouldn't send my child to a school that operated in the same way as the church does. So we saw that as something that we wanted to amplify. And yeah, you know, possibly it's absolutely correct, but that's not really been my focus. I think the things that I would really want to highlight, you know, is working across the Mormon spectrum has been crucial. And that does include the area leaders. If it wasn't for forward-thinking area leaders who did see the problems themselves, then we would not be here. But nor would we be here if it wasn't for Sara's professional expertise and a lifetime worth of pushing for change. Nor would we be here. You know, we utilised Peter Bleakley asking him, can you get us as much information as possible on this? We've got our colleague who was involved with Sunstone UK, whose suggestion it was to write a letter informing the bishops. Do you know that if you call someone to a position where it emerges that they are barred from working with children, you could go to jail? You know, that absolutely, we are perfectly placed to write this letter. We are overwhelmed with the amount of work we have to do in this situation. Nemo, can you help? You know, we reached out to Nemo to say, can you help us put this together? Here is what we need covered in it, and you know, we can adjust it from there. Everyone has been offering to support us in very, very real practical ways. And what I want to happen is for victims to feel heartened and knowing that that's how much is happening behind the scenes, for people to make sure that if you need to speak out, your voice will be heard and that you will be believed, and that we are trying so hard to make this a safe place for you. That's my hope. The other thing that I really want to highlight, in this discussion, is that the UK are going to see some changes over the next few weeks, the next couple of months, and it might make people really uncomfortable. From these new policies, there are people who will be disqualified from working with vulnerable groups in the future. But similarly, other people may be released from callings, and it may have absolutely nothing to do with this. So I really, really want to emphasise to our congregations in the United Kingdom, and, you know, if and when it happens throughout the world, please don't jump into any conclusions. Please don't make assumptions about why that's happening, because simply some people might not want to have a DBS check for all sorts of reasons that are very, very relevant. Yeah, so I really want to stress that, right, yeah, while we're at this transition time, while we are figuring out what it's going to look like, this is exciting. And yeah, let's not make problems where there aren't any.
It's massively exciting. And I think one of there's been, as we've been doing this work, there's been absolute highs and lows for us in this work. And some of the greatest privileges that we have had have also been some of the hardest moments, which has been listening to the stories of victims. We had so many people coming forward, wanting to talk, wanting to share, wanting to open up about their experiences of abuse and harm, the impact that had had on them and their family, and where that had led them in their journey of faith and around the church and mental health and social relationships. We were so concerned about so many people reaching out to us that we launched an anonymous abuse survey online to give people the opportunity that wanted to talk but wanted to be even more anonymous and not let us know who they were. And we've had an overwhelming response to that survey, with huge numbers of people coming forward and sharing information. Some of the really positive things that we have not talked about on our podcast, because it would be inappropriate to, have been times when we have been made aware of people specifically in the church who pose a direct risk. And we've been able to go to area leaders and legal counsel and give them that information, and they have acted on it in every case. And they have been wonderful. I cannot fault the response that we have had when we have gone to them and said, we are aware of this information about this member active in this congregation. The response has been fabulous. And that's been something that we've been able to go back to victims and say, action has been taken. And we've been able to link victims with support services, which has been some of the great privileges and blessings that we've had, to be able to minister in that space.
So as we get ready to close with a couple of questions, I have one I wanted to ask. And a number of members have complained that there just isn't a good way for them to make suggestions for change in the church. It's often said, well, where's the suggestion box? You know, where can I say this should be done differently? Removing your particular cause, just in general, what do you think the church could do to facilitate such conversations more with top leaders? It seems the direction now is you talk to your local leader. If your local leader doesn't send it up the chain, it doesn't ever reach higher up.
Well, I think from my experience of local leaders not listening, the number of times we've raised safeguarding, that's why we actually felt we had to become much more public about it on a podcast, as well as writing to leaders. I don't know, Jane, do you want to take that one? And I think you might have a good perspective on it. And Nemo, I think, on this one.
I think we've all learned from history, right? We all know that when we make suggestions, and especially when we're sort of firm in the need for any type of change, it comes with a risk of excommunication. We remember, Levine Anderson. We know things that have happened before. So we did have to have, and we all still do, right, repeated conversations about
that risk.
What it would take to put your head above the parapet, and we've been prepared to do that. Absolutely, there's no question. But I think what would help is when you have fearless church leaders who don't see a threat to people asking questions. When you see, and I think that's what we've been able to demonstrate from this, because with the Mormon spectrum, we still look in binaries. We still have a need for you to disagree and have a clear position about the church, and either throw it all out, or either the church is trying really hard to not do good safeguarding and it's trying to protect itself, or it's absolutely perfect. And coming together to have those discussions, we have these barriers where we just can't get over what someone's motivation is going to be. What is the real agenda behind the person who's bringing these concerns? And so what I think we've been able to do is to help leaders to feel safe, to feel like this isn't a threat, to feel challenged, and to facilitate discussions. It wouldn't be right for us to put any victim back into the hands of a church leader for further advice when further harm could be done. So we've had to point out the things that are really difficult to hear. And without you listening to really difficult things to hear, then you're not going to be able to learn. So yeah, I would suggest the church, if it takes a leaf out of the, leadership structure and what's been happening in the UK, wonderful things would happen, that we don't have to have a panic because a Mormon dissident is friends or has signed or has done some work in this area.
Nemo, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of quick things. It's really summed up best by Christopher Waddell's comments to 60 Minutes. When they said, well, what's wrong with everyone knowing about the money? He said, because then they try and tell us what to do with it. And it's this idea that even something as much as a suggestion as to what they could do with their cash is unacceptable. We need to realize that the theological underpinning is there. The scriptures in Doctrine and Covenants that talk about thinking things out in your heart and in your mind before you then take them to the Lord doesn't just apply to the individual seeking the revelation. They can take advice from others around them. So if you've got a leadership structure that's open to hearing the concerns of the members and then doing what is their position within the hierarchy, which is then taking it for the revelation and getting the answer, it's that whole idea that they're somehow getting to ignore the scriptures that basically say, don't just wait and sit for revelation to strike you over the head like lightning. Actually go out and work towards it. But they're going, no. When it's ready, it's ready. We'll ask all the questions that we want to ask, but don't you guys worry about it. Whereas if you've got members that are all concerned about the safety of their children, they need that direct path. And this is what I think local leaders could facilitate rather than stake presidents being the block. We saw back in the day when people would vote opposed at conference, they would meet with an apostle after the meeting. There's still no reason that they shouldn't do that now. The church hasn't, in real terms, grown to the size where they can't do that. The number of people that are voting opposed in person isn't insurmountable for an apostle or two to take them to one side after the meeting and chat with them. I don't know whether Nibley got it right when he said when he gave his leaders versus managers talk, but I think he did. We've got this management structure now in the church that's all about making sure that your stake president keeps you from going any further up, because then we just don't have to deal with it. When in reality, you've got people who are just everyday members of the church who could provide some really valuable feedback to the very top of the church and see some great things done. So I think my answer, that's my analysis of the problem. And I think the solution is that the church leadership structure needs to be seen as facilitating good ideas rather than them all being nervous to pass it on to the next up because, what if I'm in trouble for doing that? What if that's not the correct order of things? We need to flip that script.
And what we have experienced is stake leaders. So, from parents to victims to Relief Society presidents, bishops, stake presidents, stuff, who are kicking it up the chain and who there is some analysis happening. However, it's just not been sufficient. It just takes one barrier for it to fall. And if what's coming back is, well, we're doing this work, we've implemented this, we feel that this is the best. If the advice you're getting is that this is really good, then you're going to have this illusion of safety. And this is the thing that sort of we're saying too. This is almost a really dangerous time for safeguarding because what we don't want is for members to be so comfortable that DBS checks are happening in the UK and that, that's it, we've done our part, that actually there are all of these other things that need to come into place. We don't want an illusion of safeguarding. So yeah, I think it's about removing the barriers and about, finally people getting their expertise to where it needs to go. And that's one of the reasons why what we would see as 21st century saints is perfectly sitting with a safeguarding policy is there has to be third party external oversight. And that's something that's lacking so far that we are really hoping the church will be able to go with. Without that oversight, then, at any point we have an authority figure who, we've got this in hand, sister, you can go back to your class now. We need to have people who will challenge that.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most important things now with whoever they call across stakes to be safeguarding specialists and to be working with the stake presidents is the one thing that will be an absolute failure and a huge problem is if they call people that are yes people that are just going to say yes because they want to be popular with their leaders. They need to call people that will put their head above the parapet, hold the church to account and challenge where challenge needs to be made, but also be very proactive in being supportive and providing the right information to make things work. And I think there's two sides to activism. One is challenge, but the other side is being helpful with the information you provide to back up what you need and why.
I mean, there's three, just a really quick point, but there's usually three parties needed for any sort of change. You need the people that will live the utopia, the people that live the example of what they want it to look like. You need the activists that will call for the change in the first place. And then you need the lawmakers or the people in power to actually enact the change. You need all three of those parties for any successful change to happen.
Yeah. And in the church, you need people that are willing to say, okay, we know this is risky, but it's actually so worth it because the outcomes are so important that we hope you don't excommunicate us in the process. But if you do, then it's a fight that in a heartbeat, none of us would have changed our mind over.
Okay, so last question. How did each of you feel? How was the experience of doing this? Did you walk away feeling better or worse about the church?
I'll let ladies go first.
Yeah, I for me, I think the main response that I have is that we haven't walked away because the job isn't done. The victims that we've been working with since really early days, there are a few people who we are really spending a lot of time with as they consider how they're going to share their story and what is right for them. As we're telling them ahead of any announcement that we're making, like, this is what's happening now, and look, do you know your story, although it hasn't yet been told, this has been part of the driver for this, and they have appreciated it. They've been, very appreciative, but they've also said, you won't take your foot off the gas yet, will you? Yeah. And no, we absolutely won't, because there is a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done. And this is the church that I converted to, a living church that would see how we receive revelation as something that we can do as we counsel together. This is the church that really excites me. And although worship for me doesn't necessarily look like a traditional Sunday morning, I'm at home with a disabled son and can't leave the house, and this is a ministry I can do. This is something that I can achieve in this sphere. So I'm so honoured to be part of it, and the relationships that we have built and continue to build are just everything. Sara's just one of my best friends, and we've adopted Nemo the Mormon as someone that we can, that will fulfil any secretarial duty that we have for you. You're a very delightful team member.
He's been a wonderful unpaid intern for many months to us. Yes. I think the question's interesting, for better or worse, about the church. I have been a very, very nuanced church member for many years, certainly going back the last sort of 7-8 years. I have a separation in my mind between the gospel and the church. There is a separation for me between those two. I love everything good that this church can be and everything good that this church can achieve. And I despair over some of the things that this church is not doing that it could be doing. And I want to be part of the story of change, particularly around safeguarding. I feel much more hopeful that there has been a very successful period of time where we have sought change and we have stood with our leaders to seek that change, and that they've responded in a gracious and kind and loving way to us. They may have pushed, they may have challenged at times, but they've been good. We're friends. We get on. I think it's really important to see that the church have been willing to listen, and that has given me renewed hope that the church have listened. They've taken note of 2 women and our mate Nemo that stood up and said, "Do you know what? Not in my name, not anymore. This has to change. We can do better." And I think it's really gratifying that the church took note of that. And that gives me hope that if that can happen in the UK with safeguarding, then we can see this happen elsewhere with safeguarding. And we can see leaders hopefully not be scared to call a nuanced, difficult church member to a high-profile stake calling, but willing to kind of say, hey, do you know what? you can bring something to this space that maybe someone else can't, so we'll do it. So it's kind of given me a bit more renewed hope.
I just want to jump in on the back of that. And because when Sara received that calling, to see the pictures that we shared online of, the moment where in that moment, victims' voices were part of that process. Leadership voices were part of that process. A whole church community that involved nuance and pushing and Nemo the Mormon, this dissident Mormon from nowhere, that has been part of that process. I saw in that moment such hope for the beauty of the voices that shape what this church is. That for me is the essence of Mormonism, the beautiful potential that we have.
Last word, Doug?
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I think I was not content to sit in my ward, because the ward I live in is Oxford Ward in the UK. So it's full of academics, full of people that are willing to sit and wrestle with their difficult issues. So we sit in Sunday school. I'll never forget my first Sunday school. Someone turned around and went, yeah, but the church got $150 billion. So surely they could, and I can't remember what the rest of their point was. But just hearing someone say that out loud in Sunday school, you think this is a different place. This is not. This is a place where I can be at home. And so I guess another example of that is on Sunday, Gerrit Gong was in my ward because he was a Rhodes Scholar in Oxford. He was there visiting. He was just there in Oxford Ward. I walked in. I saw my stake president almost have a heart attack, seeing me walk into the same room as an apostle. But actually, it was all very cordial. I spoke to my stake president. I chatted to him. I spoke to Elder Gong. I chatted to him. And it was all fine. Again, so I've had that experience. But what this gives me now is hope that other people can have that experience. Is hope that even right into the heartlands of Utah, of which I've only spent a little bit of time there, but I can feel it's different. I hope that it will spread there as well. And that we will have this genuine broad tent where people can just come and be themselves, whatever their criticisms may be. That's not threatening to anyone. People will have disagreements. We'll have the language and the ability to disagree. We won't feel this need for conformity all the time. And we'll have a place where everyone can just come and be themselves. And I think that's what I have. And I wasn't content with just having it for myself. And I now have hope that the church will be able to do that, because the key to all this, and this will be my final thing, is that there's no law that made the church do this here. Yeah. There is, don't let them tell you otherwise. There's no legal requirement for the church to enact these background checks here in the UK. Yeah. And so if they can do that here without being legally compelled to, like we've seen in other parts of the world, then why not everywhere else? And that's what I'd want members to be asking their local leaders and to, push for and say, why not do it here? Why not do that?
On those words, thank you so much, Sara Delaney, Jane Christie, and Douglas Stilgoe. Thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
And thanks to Peggy Fletcher Stack.
Always a pleasure.
And to our producer, Chris Samuels. We remind you that you can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.